Hello and welcome to our viewers here in the United States and all around the world. I'm Michael Holmes. Ahead here on CNN Newsroom, the end of an era, election in Germany. Preliminary results just into CNN as to which party has a leg up in Angela Merkel's mantle. They left squalid conditions at the US border only to return home to spiralling violence in Haiti. Plus, we'll take you into the jungles of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where efforts are underway to save these endangered gorillas. Welcome everyone. We're getting our first look at the preliminary official results from the landmark election in Germany. Now here are the numbers. They show the left-leaning Social Democrats winning the most seats, eking out a narrow lead over outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel's Conservative bloc. It marks something of a sea change for the SPD, which has played second fiddle to Mrs. Merkel's CDU during recent years. Olaf Scholz, the SPD's candidate, addressing supporters on Sunday.
This is going to be a long election evening, that's for sure. But it's also certain that a lot of voters have ticked off in favor of the SPD because they wanted a change, and they wanted the next chancellor named Olaf Scholz.
But the CDU's candidate, the party's designated successor to Chancellor Merkel, says he's not ready to throw in the towel. Here he is addressing supporters on Sunday evening.
We cannot be content with this result. The outcome of the election is still quite unclear. It's going to be a long night. For the first time, I assume that there will be a federal government with, most likely, 3 coalition candidates. We from the CDU, we have been obtaining a very clear mandate from our voters. A vote for the CDU is a vote against a left government. Now, it's all about one thing, to forge a stable coalition for a strong and modern Germany.
Now, building a new ruling coalition is expected to take weeks, perhaps even months. It's also likely to require members of other parties like the Greens and the FDP. Leaders say they hope to have a new government in place by Christmas. Until that happens, Mrs. Merkel will remain in power. For more now, CNN's European Affairs commentator Dominic Thomas joins me now from Berlin. Good to see you, Dominic. Well, not the performance Angela Merkel wanted for her party, and plenty of coalition horse trading ahead, but what is your read of the results and what they tell us about the mood of Germans?
Yeah, they tell us an awful lot. I mean, what's so staggering in a way, Michael, is that they've known for 4 years that Angela Merkel was going to step away from the leadership of her party. And yet they failed to find a successor who could galvanize the German people. And so after 16 years in power, not only did they not come out ahead, but they've actually scored their worst score in the history of the party. And I think that's just something that we have to keep emphasizing. It's also the biggest drop of any of the parties running this time around. And if you look at the numbers as they stand right now, it's interesting to see that basically about 76% of Germans did not vote for Angela Merkel's party. We see other interesting things. The others to drop, of course, the far-right AfD, who once again, has not managed to sort of captivate people around its single policy anti-immigration. And the age-old sort of legacy from the former GDR, Die Linke, is almost on the verge of extinction, just about making it into the parliament. So having said that, the 3 that have gained are, of course, Olaf Scholz's SPD and the Greens and the FDP, who, of course, now know full well that they will be the kingmakers in forming a coalition moving forward.
Yeah, Merkel, of course, had this highly polished reputation abroad, perhaps less so, we learn, at home, with her popularity waning in the last term. But so what will Germans be looking for from their new leader?
Yeah, well, I think that what we're seeing is essentially this coalition in which the SPD and the CDU were together in coalition with Merkel for 3 out of her 4 cabinets. And essentially what you had was a sort of center-left to center-right government. It's clear now that we've moved towards a more center-left alignment in terms of where the German population sees itself. And you can see the CDU sort of scaremongering as we go into these coalition talks, trying to sort of spread fear about this being a kind of leftist government with higher taxes and so on and so forth. The reality, though, is much closer to what we would say continuity, except for the far-right AfD. All of the main political parties understand that climate must be put at front and center. It's just the degree to which and the aggressive nature of the policy changes. They understand that infrastructural change is going to be important and so on. But really what we're seeing here is actually more of a shift towards domestic policies, towards things that have to be taken care of in Germany, especially in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, rather than Germany as an external, looking out, global leadership kind of country. And I think to that extent, the global population is going to have to recalibrate as Germany looks internally a little bit more. And of course, with this coalition that will involve likely 3 different parties, there's going to be a certain kind of fragility, and it's going to take a lot of attention at home to maintain that continuity.
Yeah, fascinating. Obviously, the election impacts Germans, of course, but how might it impact the European Union, given Merkel's own role as a constant, a unifier, the glue in a way for the EU?
Yeah, and I think that's, also let's not forget that Emmanuel Macron, another EU staunch defender, is up for re-election in the spring of 2022. We're still reeling from the aftermath of course, years of negotiation around Brexit. The Trump presidency did not help, of course, with these institutions. And there's a kind of fragility there, again, when it comes to talking about Europe. Angela Merkel was certainly very powerful in sort of staving off some of that right-wing populist kind of rhetoric and taking on that sort of leadership role. I think that one can expect a less of a presence. The institution will continue, but I think ultimately it is weakened as one moves away towards these other sorts of issues, and it's going to be interesting to see how that ultimately unfolds, especially with the recent new US presidency and so on, and the tensions that are currently there across the Atlantic with France, the United States, and so on.
And it's a European issue, but also a German issue very much, and you touched on this. Immigration, refugees, a big issue in Germany, and back in 2015 after the big influx, they boosted, that issue boosted the far right. The far right's not done well in this election, so where does opposition to migration, where does immigration stand as an issue in Germany?
Yeah, I mean, it continues to be a subject of discussion, but it was clear that 2015, in the so-called migrants crisis, really helped the far right take on this kind of policy. It had initially been an austerity party. It sort of hitched its horse to the whole issue of immigration, and at the time, it was interesting to see that not only were they the second main party in the east of Germany, where there were issues around, of course, identity, unemployment, income disparity, but they were also able to get a substantial portion of the vote in West Germany. But they've gone overall from being the 3rd party to the 5th party with barely 10% of the vote. The issue has moved on. It's no longer something that troubles the German people or that was instrumentalized. Where I do see an issue for concern is with the unlikelihood of the CDU ending up in power. As the CDU in so many ways implodes and rethinks its agenda, the question will be the extent to which they attempt to capture back some of their electorate from the far right and to give oxygen to some of those issues again as a way of attracting those voters. And I think that that's something to be concerned about as we move forward. And we've seen this happen in France. We certainly saw it happen with the Conservative Party in the UK around Brexit.
That is a fascinating aspect. Merkel had moved the party so much to the centre. Will they now move to the right? Interesting stuff. Dominic Thomas in Berlin. Great analysis as always. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael.